Hi, I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert at professorate.com. Here we're going to be talking about the theory behind the SAT. Relax, it's only a game. That's right, for the most part the SAT verbal sections are a kind of word game, not so different really from crosswords, Sudoku, or other puzzles you might find in the newspaper. Okay, so if the SAT verbal is a kind of game, what's the game about? Isn't this a test of what you learned in school? Well, yeah and no. It's not a test about the information you've learned. There are no questions about battles and emperors or characters from Dickens or Shakespeare. You won't be asked a single question about The Great Gatsby. Instead, the SAT critical reading section looks not at what you've read, but how you read. The writing section, interestingly enough, is also primarily about reading, because here you read sentences and analyze them to see if they contain mistakes and how they can be made better. Of the entire 3-hour and 45-minute test, only 25 minutes involves actual writing. The rest, as you will begin to understand, is a word game. Like other games, including sports, what is being tested involves not only innate talent, but also, and this is key, skill, which means you can train and develop your abilities. That doesn't mean that everyone can get the highest score. It just means that if you're going to play, you ought to play when your skill levels are at their best. In later segments, I'll go into specific strategies and techniques to help you develop those skills. These segments, I think, will be quite illuminating and maybe even fun. Some segments are designed to give you a theoretical grounding in the principles behind the test, so you can see that instead of a pointless obstacle course designed simply to frustrate you, the SAT is actually a wonderful guidebook, yeah, I said wonderful, to the labyrinths of the human brain. Training to do well on the SAT may, in fact, be one of the best ways to build skills which will serve you not only in school, but also in life. Along with the theoretical segments, you'll find the strategy segments, the nuts and bolts of how to solve SAT questions. Practical, less reflective types will probably jump straight ahead, focusing exclusively on these, and that's fine. But I believe that knowing why you're doing something contributes to doing it well, so I hope you'll at least hear me out on the theoretical segments too. Think of me as a coach before the big game, giving you both a pep talk and your specific plays. Both are useful, but together you get a synergy that leads to results. So those are the segments coming up, the interesting part. First, however, we have to do some rather dull introductory business. Viewers who are already familiar with the test should skip this segment and go straight to where the action is. For everyone else, here's some basic information about the test that every student needs to know. The verbal sections are divided into two parts, critical reading and writing. Each of these sections is further divided into 3 subparts. Of the critical reading sections, 2 are 25-minute sections and 1 is a 20-minute section. The writing sections include 2 25-minute sections, 1 10-minute section, and an essay, the only part of the SAT which is not multiple choice. The essay section is limited to 25 minutes. The entire test lasts 3 hours and 45 minutes, but you're allowed to work on only one section at a time. If you do not finish that section, you may not come back to it later, so learning to pace yourself is an important aspect of test prep. It is important also to understand that every question on the SAT counts the same, whether the question is easy, medium, or difficult. So learning to recognize which questions might be difficult or time-consuming is another important part of strategy, since sometimes skipping questions is the best method for getting your highest score. It is also worth bearing in mind that in general, on each subsection of the test, that is, within each question type, the questions generally get harder as you go along. Very often, for example, the last 2 sentence completions of each section will be rated difficult. And indeed, only a few students will get both of these right. The good news is that this is not like a test at school. You don't have to get everything right to get a decent score. In fact, generally, you can make one mistake and get a perfect score. Missing 10% of the questions will still get you a high enough score to be in the running for even the most competitive schools, especially if you have talents and special activities that boost your portfolio. The complete SAT reasoning test is composed of 3 sections, the 2 verbal sections we will discuss here, and a math test. There is more overlap between the verbal and math sections than you might imagine. Both require organized, careful thinking. Each section, critical reading, writing, and math, is worth a total of 800 points if you get a perfect score. So the total perfect score is at 2,400, which very few students achieve. To give you a frame of reference, a score of 2,100 will put you in the running for even the most competitive Ivy League schools. To get that score, you can miss around 10% of the questions, leaving a little leeway for variations in your essay score. The College Board provides detailed information about scoring on their website and in their official SAT study guides, but I think your time would be better spent improving your reading and writing skills than worrying about the subtleties of test scoring. The SAT is, as stated before, except for the essay, a multiple choice test. That's good news and bad news. It's good news because you don't have to worry about memorizing stuff like, when was the Battle of Thermopylae? It's bad news because the test is designed to try to lure students into trap answers. By the way, this doesn't mean the test makers are mean people. It means that they're trying to find those individuals who care enough about distinguishing between truth and falsehoods that they make an effort to find that truth. And the effort does count, because while the intellectual challenges of the test are only moderate, the sheer length of the test ensures that for most people it's a workout. Each correct answer, whether it's for an easy, medium, or difficult question, earns you 1 point. But each wrong answer is marked -1/4 point. Statisticians will tell you that by simply eliminating one wrong answer, then you're in a position where it's in your favor to guess. If you can eliminate at least 2 in theory, you're likely to pick up points along the way. So learning to eliminate wrong answers is a key strategy. By the way, eliminating what you're not looking for is a strategy you use online all the time. Every time we use a search engine, we're simply dividing the world into what we're looking for and everything else. This simple concept has some powerful implications, which we'll get to down the road. Simply put, though, if you can separate everything in front of you into 2 categories, in or out, you're on your way to reasoning. The test makers will tell you that one of the sections on the test may be experimental, where they're testing questions for future use. But since you won't have any idea which section that might be, it isn't worth getting annoyed about being made into a lab rat while you're already sweating bricks, is it? Now let's look at the sections in detail. The critical reading section begins with questions called sentence completions, which are sentences with either 1 or 2 words missing. You have to choose the correct words from a list of 5. Following this are usually a couple of short passages, which are sometimes paired. Here there are only a few questions, usually designed to see if the reader understood the main idea of the piece or the pieces, and can compare and contrast the point of each author. Finally, there are long passages. Sometimes these too are paired. Following these are a number of questions similar in concept to those about the short passages, but generally greater in variety. These questions might require the test taker to look at specific lines or groups of lines and answer questions which might involve the reader making inferences or deductions based on the information in the text. There may also be questions to determine if the reader has understood the facts listed and also the author's point of view, which involves getting the tone. This is the section of the test where students sometimes feel the problems are especially tricky. In fact, they're no trickier than a good judge might be when he's making a ruling in a trial on whether a lawyer's arguments are admissible or not. If the student bears in mind that all that matters is understanding the author, the people he writes about, or his fictional narrator or characters, if the work is fiction, then this becomes a simple exercise in truth detection. You can see that this is where the test comes close to being an exercise in philosophy, which means the love of knowledge, the study of truth. The test makers swear this is not a test in logic, and indeed it is much simpler than a logic course one might take in college. But there are elements of basic logic here. I like to call this practical logic, but we'll get into that in more depth later. Now to the writing section. Here there are 2 kinds of questions: identifying sentence errors and improving sentences. With identifying sentence errors, the test makers present a number of sentences in which there may or may not be a grammatical error. 4 words in the sentences are underlined. Only those words are to be considered when looking for errors. If no errors are found among these 4, then the test taker simply marks the sentence as correct. As you'll notice, there are 5 bubbles for each question: A, B, C, D, and E. On these questions, no error is always E. On average, no error is the answer 20% of the time. Now turning to the improving sentence problems, here you'll find a sentence in which one part has been underlined. Following the sentence, there are 5 variations on the underlined part. The first, always A, is the underlined section exactly as it was printed in the sample sentence. Choices B, C, D, and E offer alternative versions of the underlined section. The student is directed to choose the answer which is the best version of the sentence. This can be a daunting section for the unprepared. First of all, few students are used to correcting other people's work. In fact, this section is something like being a magazine editor. Secondly, few students are used to making value judgments about a language which they're used to using in a very casual manner. What makes this section even more problematic is the fact that often 2 or more of the underlined sections are technically correct. And thus finding the best answer involves an understanding of the aesthetic and syntactical workings of the language. In simple terms, it means not only knowing the rules, but also having good judgment. In this section, logic isn't enough. In fact, intuition and a sense of proportion, even of beauty, go a long way, just as they do in everyday life when we make countless complex decisions. Another question type that you may encounter is called improving paragraphs. This is usually fairly straightforward. It simply involves looking at a paragraph and being asked to decide what's missing, what might be added, where there might be gaps in the logic and structure of the writing. The final part of the writing section is the only one that involves the student actually writing. The essay allows the student 25 minutes to write a persuasive opinion piece on a topic presented them for the first time on test day. A prompt is given, followed by the assignment, usually a very general question like, are the things that most people like to do necessarily things that people ought to do? Or something along those lines. The questions are never factual gotchas, but instead they tend to point to some moral problem and ask the student to take a side and convince the reader that they are correct. Here, the strength of the argument is key, but it better be an argument on the topic, since off-topic answers get a 0, as do entirely illegible ones, which would be a problem for me. Use of evidence and examples are important, as is general essay strategy. The test makers want to know if the student is capable of constructing a credible argument. Refinements of style are helpful, but not critical, since the essay is only 25 minutes. Each essay is read by 2 graders who can score it from 0 to 6, so the best possible score is 12. If the 2 graders differ in their score by more than 2 points, a 3rd grader is called in. So there you have it, the test and overview. Here are a few other general points to bear in mind. You are allowed to bring a calculator, but it won't help you on the verbal sections. You need a photo ID. Check with the College Board website to see what's acceptable. It's at www.collegeboard.com. You'll need an admission ticket. For test dates and sign-up information, go to the College Board website. Bring several number 2 soft lead pencils and soft erasers. Bring a watch to pace yourself. A snack is allowed if it can be stowed under the desk or chair and can be eaten outside the test room during breaks. By the way, you might be asking yourself, who and what is the College Board? Well, it's not a governmental agency and it's not part of any university. It's a business. In fact, it has no authority except the fact that some colleges think they do a good job making tests. And while some test prep people like to criticize the SAT, personally I think it's a fascinating test that's fun to take, especially if you understand what it's all about, which is searching for the truth in a world that sometimes makes it hard to find. Finally, while I hope you will find this website helpful and even inspiring, there is no substitute for practice. I strongly urge students to purchase the College Board's own official SAT study guide. This includes a number of actual past SAT tests with answers. Ideally, you'll be practicing these tests while viewing and reviewing the tips I'll be giving you in the specific segments you'll find in Professorate. In fact, in the next segment, Getting the Most Out of this series, we'll look at this in detail. I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert at professorate.com.